calling all sports fans and athletes. Have you ever longed for a place to converse about your passion for sports? Hang out, talk sports, meet athletes, and be heard. Sports Chat TV. And here's your host, Brooke Brown.
Welcome to Sports Chat TV, NASCAR, woohoo, finally. So I would like to introduce my guests. Well, they can introduce themselves. I don't know as much about them, but go ahead, Frank. Welcome to the show. Introduce yourself. We are live.
Frank Garufi Jr. from Galloway, New Jersey, just outside of Atlantic City.
And your familiarity with sports and NASCAR.
I've been basically following NASCAR for the last 2 seasons. I didn't get into it all that much until my brother started introducing me to fantasy leagues. And then NASCAR got real interesting for me. So I still say I'm a bit of a noob when it comes to it, but I really am liking it a lot.
Sweet. Right. What's up, Shane? Welcome aboard.
Hi there. Thanks for having me. Shane Rhyne. I'm in Knoxville, Tennessee, and I've been a NASCAR fan since I was a wee young lad with my Darrell Walter Hot Wheel Mountain Dew car, from back in the 80s. And so I've been following the racing since then and other sports as well. I used to do a little baseball play-by-play on the radio when I was in college. So enjoy sports.
Sweet. Welcome aboard. So, as all of the people who weren't watching this one that was live didn't know, we were just talking about Daytona. I think we should all talk about that because it involved a lot of fire, and I'm a pyromaniac, and that made the race worth watching. And even the 6 to 8 hour race that it turned out to be, I don't know. It just seemed like it went on forever.
It was a mini-series. It was an epic episode of racing.
So,
yeah.
I guess we're not really going to talk about the racing part. We're going to talk about a crash that led to insanity. So, if those out there didn't get a chance to watch it, Montoya driver ran into a truck, wasn't it?
The jet dryer.
Yeah. And the jet dryer exploded. Yay! That's where the fireworks came. And so, elaborate a little bit on, how the turn of events and how, for once in a while that became, the thing to be watching that night instead of anything else that was on TV because of blowing it up in social media and the news stations going in, hey, live from this, check this out. So.
Yeah, it did. You're right. It changed a lot of what was going on in the entertainment world and in social media. It was interesting to watch. People who were not watching the race suddenly were drawn into the race by this. Normally, a red flag delay would not get more viewers to watch the race. Let's be clear about that. But this was such an odd event where the car breaks, he hits the dryer. There's the jet fuel explosion, and then what happened next was, fortunately everybody was okay, but what happened next was just insanity with everybody having fun. Hey, Valarie.
Aboard.
Everybody having fun on social media, talking about it, chatting it, and it gave everybody a little bit of a halftime break to get on Twitter and Google Plus and Facebook and talk about the race and invite their friends to come be a part of it, which I think changed the dynamic of the race so much from a fan's perspective.
Welcome aboard, Valarie. We're talking about Daytona and the, epic crash that made everybody watch.
Okay.
But for first, you can introduce yourself and talk about why you wanted to join and how much of a fan of NASCAR you are and sports and all of that.
Okay. My name is Valarie, and I'm a fan of all sports, mostly football. My son played college football for University of Richmond when they won the national championship. So all my life I've been a football fan, and one of my best friends was really into NASCAR, and so I would be talking to him on the weekends and never know what he was talking about. So I started watching it and learning a little bit more about it, and then got involved with a little fantasy league and won the spring fantasy league last year. So I'm now a fan.
There you go. So, your take, as we can go back on how it changed, I remember watching it and wondering if they're going to tweet, why not, hang out during a red flag. You know what I'm saying? From their phones. Wouldn't that be cool?
Yes.
Yeah.
Like, just to be like, hey, I'm here on the track, you know, and just be like.
I think Shane was saying in a pre-show that it was funny how none of the other drivers, you know, even thought that they would even have a phone on them. And here's this, you know, this younger driver, you know, Keselowski, who's got his phone with him, and you know, and is taking a picture and tweeting right from, you know, the red flag while they're waiting for, you know, everything to kind of get cleaned up and to start going again.
Right, right.
It was interesting to watch. I don't know. Maybe it's because I was more excited about the fire. I don't know. Just keeping it real.
I think obviously no one expected that. I mean, here you are in a yellow where they're just cleaning up the track from, you know, a previous tire being blown out, and you know, all of a sudden here comes Montoya coming around, and he seemed like he was even going faster than what was allowed for a caution at the time. And just, you know, even the cameramen didn't have any idea what was going on because they weren't even focused on anything except right out of the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, this fireball appears out of nowhere, and, you know, all the hoopla started. So
nice.
I think, though, also that race was almost the perfect storm for that because everybody was already watching because of Danica going over the, you know, so you had a lot of people that were watching it, and then you added the fire to it.
Yeah. Well, you like you said, you had Danica who was, you know, making her debut in the Sprint Cup League. You had, you know, the first rain delay, then the second rain delay, and now we're starting at night where, you know, we were saying before how, you know, they transitioned into night at Daytona, but they never started at night. So it does change the dynamics of the track and how, you know, their strategy of driving on it really goes. So it was the perfect storm.
I'm just fixated on the fire. Sorry about that. Anyway, I was just looking, not to stray a little bit away from the season, but there's some headlines out there about even President Obama is getting involved with NASCAR and actually honoring Stewart for his championship of 2011. Do you think that's a political move, or he's just cool and likes sports and
the president typically every year honors the champions of the professional sports. So that's kind of an annual thing. That goes back forever. You know, calling the winning team at the Super Bowl in their locker room, inviting the baseball World Series team to the White House. Here come the dogs. But yeah, so that's an annual thing. I don't think there's anything political about that. That was just, hey, it's time to recognize the last year's champion.
It is nice though now that NASCAR is being recognized because it's really, as of the last couple of years, that NASCAR really is starting to get a bigger fan base and a bigger presence in sports, whereas they were sort of like the soccer of the U.S. You know, they never had quite the following or the publicity that, you know, your baseball and your hockey and your basketball and football does. So.
Which is funny, considering isn't NASCAR one of the most spectated sports physically, though?
It is.
But yet doesn't get the notoriety that other sports do?
Well, it's generally viewed as a southern sport. It had been for a long time, but it was in the 80s and 90s, particularly, especially in the 90s, had become one of the most viewed television sports, and that was really when it took off big time. You know, there was a TV special on 2020 did a segment, I think, back in the 1990s about interviewing fans of NASCAR, and they were stunned that there were a lot of women fans, and that the women fans could name for you every driver's and their sponsor, and that they would only buy Tide because they were Ricky Rudd fans, and Ricky Rudd was sponsored by Tide. This got a lot of companies very interested in NASCAR in the 90s. A lot of money was poured into the sport and to expand the television contracts. Suddenly they're on multiple networks. It just became a huge deal. Now we're seeing the after effects of the recession now on that for the sport. But yeah, it's always been an interesting thing because it has been a lot of eyeballing it, but it was still considered a regional sport for the longest time.
Well, to be honest, I was never like the biggest fan over here in the West. But but I'm like getting into it now. I usually used to prefer Indy, but now joining the league and like kind of paying attention, I'm kind of becoming more of a fan than I used to be. I don't know. Maybe it's because I absolutely love the movie Talladega Nights, and I think it's like one of the funniest movies ever made. But I still I'm getting into it, and outside of like anything, I like cars. So I think me liking cars also has turned me into more of a fan of NASCAR. But I don't know. It's interesting to see how all of the notoriety is changing. I mean, as we're seeing, a lot of NASCAR people now have joined Google+. So that's been really cool to see. Like, they'll be updating every week lately on Google+ about what they're doing. So
the Roush team has been very active on Google+ for sure, and several others are starting to get more active.
Which is, I'm wondering why. That again goes, red flag? Why weren't they using Hangouts?
Well, they were the cars.
I know, but
it would be interesting to see.
I think NASCAR sees it as just like every other business does, and not just in sports, but you really need to have a social media presence. People want to connect with the drivers. They want to connect with with everyone. So them having a presence on Facebook, on Twitter, and especially on Google Plus is nothing but bonus points for them in keeping their fan base and gathering new ones.
They have always looked forward to reaching out to their fan base. Football, baseball has a fan base that follows them no matter what. They've had to work a little harder, so they're willing to work harder, and really they are one-on-one with their fans. They always have been.
Yeah.
With all of the football and baseball, even you get somebody to sign, a baseball now, it's next to impossible. A lot of them have their contracts, and they're not allowed to sign certain type of memorabilia. The NASCAR and racers in general have always been, trying to be down right in with their people. You can see it when you go to the races. I went to the Indy race down here in St. Pete, and they were just amongst everybody and having a good time. They didn't have an entourage that was protecting them. They just want to be out there and having a good time with everybody. So I think being in Google Plus is kind of adds to that as a natural fit.
Agreed. So I don't know the history of sponsorship. We kind of touched on it a little bit. But I've noticed in recent years that certain sponsors pulled out for certain reasons. Is it because of what the drivers are doing, away from the racetrack? Or is it just because of the recession? Or is it just regular, hey, we'll go do something else and come back? Or, I
think it's more of it's a combination mostly of the last two. The recession has had a huge effect. Obviously, it's an expensive proposition to sponsor a team. And look at what's happening right now with Trevor Bayne, Knoxville's driver. He's not going to race in the Nationwide Series this weekend in Texas. He's 5th in points in the series. He won the Daytona 500 last year, and he still can't get a sponsor. 10, 15 years ago, they'd be lining up to hand him money. And right now, companies are just having a hard time justifying the expense of that. There's also, I think, the recession, you're seeing the effects of that. Look at the Bristol race a few weeks ago. There were a lot of empty seats at Bristol. Where normally, truthfully, here in my part of the country, that's where I live. It's just down the road from Bristol. Bristol season tickets were usually part of divorce settlements. It was a custody battle who got the Bristol tickets. But you saw empty seats on TV this year. That was unheard of. The recession's hurting NASCAR hard right now, and the sponsors are having to weigh their choices and walk away. And for some sponsors, there is a change of direction who they're marketing to. So they're going to go a different tactic and sponsor something else for a while. NASCAR may not be hitting the audience they want to hit.
Okay.
Just like with every professional sport, though, when you have sponsorships, it does matter not only what they do professionally, but also what they do off the outside of work as well. I'm pretty sure, I don't know this for a fact, but I'm pretty sure they all have clauses in there that that what they do off the track will affect what happens to them on the track as well.
Well, Kyle Busch almost lost M&M's at the end of last season for his antics, and M&M's sat down with him and said, "Look, we can't have you as a part of this." Yeah. So there is some of that has to go on.
Their images are married. If Kyle or for that matter any of the drivers are running around, not only Kyle has a bit of a temper even on the track, let alone outside of it. So what they do. I mean, don't get me wrong. That probably also helps. What he does sometimes on the track probably helps to keep fans interested in talking about what's going on. But it is just as important for them to have a good image off the track as it is for them to have one on it. As far as corporate sponsorships go, and not wanting their names associated with people that have done things that aren't so good.
The sponsorships used to look kind of the other way, quite often, but now in all the sports, if you're, crossing that line, they know that the customers are really in tune and are not going to buy their product or are going to voice their opinions. So I think they try to be proactive and really, monitor and police within and get their guys in line.
Yeah.
I mean, well, I was just noticing, I don't know, it was just interesting. Again, I go back to my reference, which is Talladega Nights. Bad reference. But in the scene in there, they talk about, they have, a dinner where, their dinner is, every sponsor they have from, Pepsi to Taco Bell to, Pizza Hut. And you even see now, was it 2 weeks ago on the race? What we were talking about, Biffle always seems to be hey, Coca-Cola. So, do they really get paid that much for just, product placement?
Oh, yeah, they get rewarded. They get rewarded for product placement. Coca-Cola sponsors, or used to at least sponsor, a competition amongst the Coke family of drivers that they have. They have multiple drivers sponsor Coke. And the deal was you got points as a driver based on how many times you could be seen drinking the Coke product during an interview. And so you would see them during rain delays. A driver would pick up and say, "Oh, I got to do this for my friends at Coca-Cola," and then they take their swig. And I hope I get some Coke points too for doing that. But but they would reward them with some financial rewards at the end of the season based on which driver accumulated the most points.
Yeah.
Dear Google, we're not sponsored by Coca-Cola. Just saying.
They're just so we know.
Brooke, you're open to that idea.
I would not say no to the idea. It's part of the drivers. It's part of the driver's agreement in NASCAR. The contract that you sign with the sponsors that you're going to name them. It's a real big faux pas if the driver gets on there and he's on the victory podium and he starts naming people and doesn't name the sponsors of his car.
And do you notice that they're always the first names out of the mouth? I mean, the Coca-Cola Chevrolet, with about 4 other minor sponsors underneath of it, are always the first words out of a driver's mouth when the first question gets handed to them.
No doubt. There's a PR person outside the car. I work in PR. There's a PR person outside the car in Victory Lane to whisper into the driver's ear to remind them, don't forget, Oreo's got a special deal going this week. You want to thank everybody for the Oreo 100th birthday and what a great day this is to win for them. Telling them that, reminding them those things. What everybody was amazed about when Jeff Gordon first came on the scene was that his father, when Jeff was young, in addition to teaching Jeff how to drive and make sure he learned how to drive at go-kart races, he took Jeff to a media coach so that Jeff learned how to speak on camera from the top of his head and name off his sponsors and work that into the conversation. That was as important a skill for a new driver as knowing how to drive the car, because it made him media friendly and it made him sponsor friendly, and that's all the difference in the world. And that's why DuPont has been hanging out with him since he got into the racing.
Can you just imagine what their contracts look like? I mean, the stack of paper that they probably have to read through before they sign on the last line. It probably looks like something that came out of Congress.
Well, yeah, it's going to be huge. And you figure, remember, they're paying huge money, $30 million, to see the primary sponsor of a car. They're expecting some return on that. It's more than just having a pretty picture on the hood. They want the drivers to be able to speak about them, to represent them well when they're in public at appearances, to be able to name them when they're on the podium. They want all that. So it's a huge part of the driving experience. Now, old school NASCAR fans don't care for that very much, but it's what fuels the racing.
Sure. Well, they want to be able to have, the amount of cars that they do without those things. It's what drives them.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to field some 43-car field much longer, and especially I think in the nationwide series, if the economy doesn't turn around for the sponsor teams pretty soon. If you're seeing Roush Racing having to pull back and take cars out, if Roush Racing can't find sponsors, you know something's up.
Yeah.
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 Well, to put in, which is interesting about that is I've had the privilege in the past couple of years to work for Barrett Jackson.
Ah.
And they have now a relationship with Roush and some other teams. A lot of them come to Barrett Jackson auctions and buy cars or make appearances for charity. Like a couple of years ago, you had they were selling Casey Kane's car, but you had Richard Petty drive it up on the auction block, and everybody got all excited, and it sold for like $100,000 or something to charity, and it was great, and everybody was into it, just like any other charity that they get. But I just think it's interesting that the intricacy of people coming together, companies coming together, and specifically like a company like Barrett Jackson, it's his auto auction, and then NASCAR, and the money that a lot of the teams come and just buy cars. It's interesting just to see the relationship between the two, when auto auction is a little bit different than auto racing. So I've learned that in my experience, but to get back to season, I happened to just look at power rankings coming into this weekend. Anybody want to guess who's number one?
Stewart?
Yes.
His team is on a roll.
Yeah. Top three are Stewart, Kenseth, and Dale Earnhardt Jr., actually.
Yeah, Dale's actually having a good season.
I still don't understand. We were talking about that in the pre-show, too. To me, Junior is just so overrated.
You can send all email to him.
Go ahead, man. I'll stand by it. Even the announcers on Fox and TNT last year and everything, you always hear them mention Junior. Look out for Junior. This might be the race that breaks his 150 winless streak, and but week after week after week, that's all you hear. This is going to be the race that Junior's going to break out, and sure enough, eventually they're going to be right, because eventually he might actually win one. But I really think the man is well overrated compared to.
It's his legacy. It's his legacy. It's all the spin-off of the legacy, and it always will be. And the family has fans that will hang, forever with them.
Well, they were saying that he's probably got the most dedicated fans out of all of the drivers, and that his popularity compared to all the other drivers is, enormous. But it definitely doesn't have to do with performance, because he doesn't have the performance that everyone else has.
Yeah. Go ahead, Shane.
No, I was going to say, Brett, go ahead. What you were going to say there?
Oh, well, the name does carry, but I was just wondering, had his father not passed away in the horrible crash, what would be happening now if his father had continued to race, and it wasn't.
I'm not sure if it's that his father passed away from being behind the wheel during the race, or if it has more to do with just his father's notoriety. I think it might be more about his father's notoriety and how great his father was, regardless of the crash or not.
Well, he inherited a fan base that was not naturally his own, because they wanted a new driver. They lost their driver. They had the son, and they were able to move over. That fan base didn't translate over to Kevin Harvick, who took over the actual car.
Yeah.
They went to Dale Jr. And that's Dale's Jr.'s cross to bear. I think that has been a frustration for him as well. I think that it has put unreasonable demands on him. We were saying off before the show. I said only half kiddingly, he'd be a decent driver if his name wasn't Earnhardt. He does well. He's had some hard times, I think, working with the new teams and the crew chiefs he's had to deal with over time. But when he gets settled into a group, he can drive a car. I mean, there's no doubt about that. He's got the skill. He's shown it, certainly at the tracks like Talladega and Daytona. And he's a consistent finisher. Usually, he can get there in the top 10, 15, and bring it home. And right now, he's having a great season. He's finishing top 5 about every week. That's a good year for most drivers, but because his last name is Earnhardt, it's not a good year because he hasn't won 7 championships.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, like you mentioned it. So the name, so we're all agreeing that the name is carrying the pressure and the load.
Yes.
Just like in any other sport, like certain big names get mentioned. I'm not going to go into any other sports, but just more than others. You know what I'm saying? And then everybody knows their name, their household name, but do they really have the skill as other drivers do? You know, like.
I'll go on and say he's not shown me, at least again, I'm out of everyone here. I'm probably one of the biggest noobs of NASCAR, but in just the last 2.5 years I've been really following NASCAR. He's not shown to me to be as consistent or as good as what the name carries, in the sport.
Do you think it's also, well, I was just going to bring up this point, since it's an American sport and there's American companies, do you think that has a big writing on who's popular and who gets what notoriety in certain races regardless of how they finish?
I don't really see that.
No, I don't see that. You talking about the manufacturers of the cars, or?
Yeah. I mean, just recently, isn't it just, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but just recently, Toyota engines now. But wasn't it majority, American-made, Dodge, Chevy, Ford engines? So.
Yeah, back in the 60s, some foreign makes ran. Mercedes ran, I believe. Some others that ran as well. But yeah, it's been always primarily American makes. The cars have to be built in America. At least the showroom versions have to be built in America. That's why the Camry's eligible. It's built in Kentucky. And so you have that opportunity. There was some resistance to Camrys coming in. I think Dale Jarrett had the best line about that, though, because he acknowledged what is kind of the dirty little secret in the world. The Chevys and the Fords that are being driven are built in Canada or Mexico. The Camry was built in Kentucky. And when he was asked, he was driving the Toyota at the time. He was asked, how did it feel to be driving a foreign car? He says, I don't know. You'll have to ask the Ford and Chevy guys.
Yeah.
He's my car's built in Kentucky. He asked them. There was some resistance to it, but I've never been one to cheer for the car make. I always say I cheer for the Archer, not the Arrow. I cheer for the drivers, and whatever car they want to drive, if they can show me they can drive it, that's great. I drive a Toyota Camry. I cheer for drivers who drive Chevys. Whatever. Some of my favorite drivers drive Fords too. So I'm all over the map with that. I don't have loyalty to a brand or what country the car is from.
Yeah, I don't particularly follow by the type of car. I'll follow who has like the history on the track, and some makers do better on certain tracks. Mm-hmm. But other than that, and looking at research, I really don't. It doesn't make a difference to me.
I think I'm with Val on that one because my love of NASCAR kind of came with joining the fantasy leagues and stuff. I've been more about how the driver performs on a certain track than I am necessarily the make and model of the car. So it's definitely about who the what the track is and how the driver performs on that track than anything else.
Now also, sometimes I have to admit that I kind of take it when I look at racehorses. It's the look of the car that I'll go for. Can't help it, y'all, but that's the truth.
Okay, well, I will say this: my mom cheered for Jeff Gordon because she thought that the rainbow car was pretty. There
you go.
Right.
Well, I was listening. Sorry, I had to make sure everything was working correctly, or I was going to lose. I've always been a Jeff Gordon fan. And as Jeff Foxworthy said in a comedy bit, it's because he enunciates. So maybe that could be the reason.
Well,
but that's not like...
He caught a lot of flack for that when he came in because he wasn't the good old Southern boy. He was from California. Like I said, his father sent him to media training. He caught a lot of flack for that early on.
I just think it's interesting. You know,
he wasn't one of us.
You know, Jeff, speaking about Gordon, man, he kind of fits into my Dale Earnhardt Jr. mold where he's another guy who I don't think has been. I mean, yeah, he makes it into the top 12, and he's always in the chase every year, but he's another guy who doesn't really perform as well as the hoopla is around him. He take for instance last week, man. He led the entire race. I mean, I think he was in first place for more than 200 laps, and yet it didn't matter because in the end he just couldn't pull it home.
Well, he got thrown into the wall, I believe. was that that was a small piece of it. As you watch more and more races over the years, you're going to see that leading the most laps is a very poor indicator of whether you're going to win the race.
Yep.
Most likely, leading the most laps will not win you the race. It's what happens at the end like that with at Martinsville with I forget who was it that was it. Boyer. Was it Clint Boyer who put everybody in the wall with that green white checker? Yeah, those kind of things. I don't think that's indicative of the driver's skill. There's not a lot you can do when you're being thrown sideways, into the curve by another guy's fender. And Gordon, he's got 4 championships under his belt. I don't know that you can say a lot that says he's not a talented driver. He did it. He did it the hard way before the chase. I always say that was back when you had to just win constantly and consistently. Throughout all 36 races to get there, and I'll admit he's never been one of my favorite drivers. My mom cheered for him, so I was nice and polite while we watched together. but I respect what he's able to do, and anybody who can put a championship on that kind of season deserves that at least. You're catching him we're nearing the end of I think his career more than, say, some people are coming up, the Kyle Bushes, those guys. Yeah. You're catching them at the beginning of them. Kyle Busch reminds me a lot of Dale Earnhardt Sr., who I also did not care for. But but he's that same attitude. So you're catching. It'd be like if you started watching NASCAR in 2000 and said, well, I don't think Dale Earnhardt Sr. is that good. Because he hasn't won anything in the last couple of years, but he had 7 championships behind him, to say, yes, he is that good. So that's the same thing with Jeff Gordon. I mean, you got to give him, you got to watch a little more, I think, and get a sense of what he can do. He has a great instinct for the tracks. There's not very many tracks, actually, he does not have at least one win on. I think he's won on almost every track in the series, including the road courses, which says a lot. It's a hard thing for drivers.
It seems like the fan base in NASCAR, they're very dedicated. No matter who you start off with, like when they enter in, once you hang on to those drivers, you're with them for life. So anybody who was good, if Jeff was winning a few years ago, they're still going to be with him. It's kind of like they're your favorite. You're not jumping ships just because they're not. They are, and they just keep seeming to growing their fan base. Yeah.
Well, speaking of tracks, we can talk about this upcoming race.
Fast track.
So, how do you think the drivers will be on this Texas Motor Speedway coming up in the Samsung Mobile 500? Yep. And I'm not sponsored, by the way, anybody out there watching. I just said it that way.
Yeah. I think that the Roush drivers, they do well on that kind of track, a fast track, so anybody that's with them will probably be, able to hold their own.
Does it come down to the last lap, though? I mean, we've seen that in the last few races where, you could be leading or doing well, and then all of a sudden something happens, and then you don't win. You come in second or third.
That's the nature of that game. Yeah. That track is interesting. I mean, there's several drivers who seem to have done very well there historically. Dale Jr. is one who does well there historically. Jeff Gordon used to do there pretty well in the early days of that track. He's not done as well recently. I don't have any data. I could probably pull up a tab and look, but I think that probably the last few years it's probably been folks like Kyle Busch who've been doing very well there. I don't know if he's pulled any wins out lately. I think Jimmy Johnson has won recently there. But it's one of those mixed bag tracks where truly anybody could walk out of there a winner. It just depends on who's having a really good setup, who's ready to go, and what the conditions are the day of the race. It seems to be pretty temperamental as far as the weather goes, and you've even had odd little moments where the track was weeping. It rained so much earlier in the week that they had to stop the race at one point for a rain delay with no rain because water started coming up out of the track from under the ground. And so it's a little temperamental with the weather. It can be pretty slick if everything's not right set up for you. But it's a fun. It can be all right. The mile-and-a-half tracks aren't my favorite to watch. I mean, that's one of those where I'll set up my fantasy league and I'll check in every so often and see how it's doing on the DVR and go do something else in the yard and come in and watch the highlights later. I much prefer the short tracks and some other tracks like that. Just because they give more of a challenge. There's so many of those mile-and-a-halfers out there that it's just hard to get interested in all of them all the time.
Well, according to my notes here, positions going into this weekend, we have Biffle at first, Earnhardt at second, Stewart at third, Kansas at fourth, Harvick at fifth, Truex Jr. at sixth, Hamlin at seventh, Newman at eighth, Boyer at ninth, and Jimmy Johnson running out the top 10. So, it'll be interesting because those have primarily been like the top 20 of the last 3 races, if I'm correct, right? So, it'll be interesting to see if they can hold their positions. That's
the hard thing with the fantasy league is, and I think Frank and I were talking about it once, that you have your people that you like each time that are doing well, but you can only use them so many times.
Yeah.
And then you're sunk.
Yep.
Yeah, what is with that? Like, I've played other fantasy leagues, and it's not like when I was playing, I'm playing the NBA, not to like be, but I mean, we don't have a limit on our players per team. You know what I'm saying? So I don't understand why we can't choose our drivers every week.
This is the first time that I've used the one that we're all in together in the fantasy league. I won't mention what it is just in case we're not supposed to, but I've been in other from different companies doing fantasy leagues, and this is the first time that I've seen it done this particular way. I guess from each fantasy league that you can possibly join, there's always some little caveat or some way that they do it a little differently than all the others. I will say it's interesting, though, because with all the other sports, you can take a lot of data that is out there and pretty much come to a very good conclusion of what that performance is going to be that week. But with NASCAR, I laugh because I say it's a 500 race lap. It does not matter what happens the first 499 laps. It's the very last lap that determines everything. So you can look at their practices. You can look at their qualifying. You can look at their history on that track. And it only takes one tire blowout, one engine to blow up, or one person who just goes sideways in turn 2 that's going to decide the fate of the entire race. So
or a fire.
Yeah, or a jet tire blowing up.
Sorry.
You've got your fingers crossed for a fire, I know.
Yeah, you know what? It did actually add a lot.
That was entertaining. I'm sorry. I was like glued to them cleaning the fire up because.
It was great watching them dump all the Tide on.
I was going to say, did you run out and buy some Tide and tribute?
Tide was just absolutely loving that whole situation because they actually made a commercial out of that. It was hilarious.
Yeah, they unfortunately they were asleep at the wheel that night on their social media channels because they missed an awesome opportunity to jump in right then and start tweeting about it. They didn't start responding to it until like the next day.
Yeah. But they did do a real good turnaround of making a commercial real quickly from the highlights of them dumping all the Tide onto the track. So.
Right.
By the way, I was going to say last year's winners were Matt Kenseth and Tony Stewart at that track.
Yeah.
So they're in the top 10 positions already, and they're doing well this season. Watch somebody that we're not even talking about wins. But anyway.
Yeah, Logano's always my underdog, man. He's a guy, and I can't wait for him to win his first race, man. That would be great.
I'll tell you the driver that I'm watching to sneak in at some point here is Marcos Ambrose.
Yeah.
He's driver that strikes me right now. He's just on the edge of getting a winning race put together. I actually had picked him as an underdog to win the Daytona 500 this year, and he ran pretty well most of the time. But he's a driver I think worth keeping an eye on. It'd be fun to see how NASCAR reacts to the Australian, jumping in.
Yep.
So I was actually browsing here on NASCAR.com. Not a sponsor.
No,
Not a sponsor. But thanks. But I thought this is really cool, and maybe this is why I need to brush up on my history of NASCAR. Is that right now they're letting fans or those registered, I'm not completely sure, but be a part of history and voting for the 2013 NASCAR Hall of Fame. Now, you can go on there and there's a list, and you can read up on their bios, videos, see them talk, their photos, and I think that's really cool because a lot of Hall of Fame are inducted by a committee, and especially basketball, certain committees. So I think it's interesting that they're letting the fans kind of vote online to kind of
like the People Choice Award.
Exactly, but I think leagues should be doing that anyway because not to take away from the skill of some past athletes. That deserve the Hall of Fame. Mm-hmm. What I'm getting at is, some have been inducted in years that maybe they should have been inducted sooner or later based on how long they've been an athlete or, participated in that sport. So I think it's interesting that they're getting the fans involved just as well as the fans are very dedicated, as we've mentioned.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Brooke, I see it working for NASCAR. I don't like it for the other sports. I think, in other sports sometimes people should be inducted earlier or not at all, or, the other circumstances, but I still like the committee and them looking at the body of work and everything that goes with it more so. But I think in NASCAR, I like the fan base involved, the whole, idea that it's homegrown kind of. I think that's interesting, though.
Well, what they're doing, it looks like, is that the fans, the top 5 individuals who receive votes from the fans are then presented to the overall Hall of Fame committee. So that voting for them doesn't automatically get you in the hall, but essentially it creates a new category of 5 people that may or may not have already been considered by the committee, which I think is a great idea. It's kind of fun.
Right.
I predict right now, just looking at who they've got on here, I see Rusty Wallace showing up in there, because I think that's going to end up being more of the more recent folks that typically people have more knowledge of than some of the historic characters. I think some of the historic characters. I think it's great if NASCAR does what the Baseball Hall of Fame does, which has a committee that looks at the old timers that people don't remember, that have no cultural memory of it, to make sure they don't get overlooked in there. I think characters like Fireball Roberts will certainly be worth considering, but you'll see probably Richard Childress, Rick Hendrick, and Rusty Wallace emerge from that pack.
You don't want to see it turn into nothing but a popularity contest.
No, because Dale Earnhardt Jr. will be in next year with Bill Elliott. I'd be okay with Bill Elliott, by the way. Just so we're clear, I'd be okay with Bill Elliott.
I think we've discussed how Earnhardt Jr. is not our fave. We've been over that a little bit, but
it's fun. It's fun to have opposites.
Well, speaking of, barriers, but it's interesting how Danica Patrick has put a lot of emphasis on racing in general. When she was in Indy, and now that she's moved over to NASCAR, is the buzz, has it worn off because she's not winning in NASCAR, or
she's not had a lot of races to try to win in yet? What she's run 2, 3 Cup car races at this point. Mostly she's been doing the nationwide, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
She pretty much got blamed for that wreck that she had in Daytona, and she really wasn't. I don't think she's getting quite the fair shake that she should be getting in the Sprint Cup.
What do you think?
Well, I mean, there's been issues, gender disparities in a lot of sports, but I mean, what is it? I mean, everybody was so fixated, and she became like a big, huge GoDaddy.com sponsor. So, like, her person to be in there, be sponsored by them. So she was popular, and then now people are like, I'm not so sure about her. Like, are they quick to judge that quickly in the fact that she hasn't really been in?
Well, I think that there's some lack of taking her seriously because of the GoDaddy ads.
Yes.
But she was doing those before she came over to NASCAR. She was doing those when she was open wheeling. I think that give her due. I mean, I don't think you can drive an Indy 500 if you can't drive a car.
Yeah.
I'm not a big open wheel guy, but I do watch that one race at least. But you have to wheel a car. You have to be able to do it. And she doesn't get to drive because she's pretty. I mean, that's kind of what I think everybody's putting on to her. I think that's what they're projecting, is that she can only drive because she's good looking. But no one's going to invest that much money in a driver and a car and a team just because somebody looks good on camera. They have to be able to get that car near victory lane at least. And so that, I think she's got some there, but there's so much, the media puts so much on that. If Darrell Waltrip said her name one more time during the Daytona 500, I thought my head was going to explode.
I do think it's unfair the way she's being. It's almost the way the media portrayed her. She was set up for failure to begin with. Anything less than a win at Daytona 500 was going to be a total epic failure for her. At least
they wanted that story. They wanted that story.
Yeah.
And so that's it. If she doesn't win the championship, even though she's only racing 10 races, then it's a failure year for her. And it's crazy. It's unrealistic expectations. It's like expecting, that just because you're Peyton Manning, you're going to win Super Bowl every year. It's not going to happen.
You know what? I think anybody though that changes into the NASCAR from Indy or from anything else, they're always going to be skeptical, and they're going to wonder how they're going to do and kind of misjudge. So I think that she'll just kind of brush it off, work hard, learn, and know that it's a different type of racing, and will improve, and then she'll get there in a couple of years.
Yeah, there's a huge learning curve.
Yeah, it's not going to bother her what people are saying because she's gone through it. I mean, I'm sure the first time she was racing, who's this little girl that's coming up here? So she's had to prove herself all along. So this is like just another, so what, I'll get through it, and, I'll come out strong on the other end. It's just going to take me a little bit.
The interviews that I've seen her do, she definitely does seem like the type to me that does push through the stuff. She isn't the type of person who is going to sit on the sidelines and cry when she gets the bad press, or that, she doesn't, do extremely well. I do expect to see her stick around.
She doesn't avoid the media either. When she had that wreck, she was telling them, hey, I'm not used to that kind of driving. I let go. I'm not letting go because I'm hiding my eyes. I'm letting go because that's how I'm used to doing an open wheel. So she addresses it and then moves on, which give her a lot of kudos for that. And so she seems like she's strong-hearted and will come out on top.
Yeah.
I apologize if there's like two people watching this. If you have questions, comments, concerns, relay them to me, because I feel like I've been doing all the talking. So let us know if there's fans actually out there watching this. I don't want to search because I'm not sure what the new layout and everything, if I'm going to crash. So, same with that, is any questions, comments, concerns from the panel about the show, what we've covered, anything we've talked about? I don't know.
No, it would be cool though if we could hear, before we wrap, who's everyone's predictions for who's going to take it this year.
The whole championship.
Yeah.
The whole ball of wax.
What's that?
That's the whole ball of wax, huh? Who's going to win it?
I don't think I'm there yet.
I'm thinking I'm going for Biffle.
Yeah, I have Biff. As a matter of fact, on my little notes, I have Biffle circled.
I don't know. Just something about he may not be awesome right now, winning every race, but he's definitely up there in the points and has the experience behind him, from what I can tell.
Yeah, Edwards is my man though. Carl always is, but I don't think he has it in the for this season?
I'm with Valarie. Edwards is definitely my number one driver, but even if I wasn't able to pick him, I'm going to say look for Hamlin.
Yeah, he's cool.
Don't bet against Tony Stewart. He's won 7 of the last 16 races. To go back to last season, and Ryan Newman with that same team is worth looking at. He seems to be picking up speed now. It looks like that whole team has kind of got it figured out for a little while.
Yeah,
it's hard to bet against them. Yeah, but if you're looking at who's in the top 10 right now, who's eligible for the chase right now, if you were looking at everybody, I'd say that Biffle's not a bad choice as well. But look for somebody like maybe even Martin Truex Jr. to surprise people. But to me right now, I think it's all about Stewart until somebody proves me wrong.
Yeah.
Based on the power rankings, or just your gut feeling?
Just on what he's done. Again, like I said, 7 wins in the last 16 races. Who else has that?
I'm just sarcasm. I got it. I'm just me. Anyway, well, I want to thank you all for joining me.
Thanks.
Sorry it took me so
you.
long. I had a little technical.
No worries.
And I don't see anybody. I'm looking at a white screen, so.
Oh, nice.
Well, we're all incredibly good looking. Don't worry about it. It's fine.
All right, yes, I want to thank you all, and it'll probably be up in a few hours because, well, that's me. But it's been great, and check on the site, check on whatever page I'm on, and thanks for watching. If there was like 2 fans, I know Tom's out there watching from afar, so thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
And that's about it. So have a great night, everybody.
Okay.
Thanks.
Good night. Thanks for having us, Brooke.
Thanks,
no problem. Bye.